Good morning. How's everyone doing? I don't know if I necessarily need to introduce these two guys, but I might just take a quick moment and introduce Jiho, Jeff, and Artic. And the three of us are representing a growing community effort around decentralizing governance, and we wanted to collectively share some thoughts and reflections on the progress that we've had to date. So we're going to talk about a few different things this morning. We're going to talk about decentralization. Why is it important to this project? What are some of the draft phases that we've been thinking about doing collectively as a community? What's been our progress around this work to date? And maybe share some reflections around the process up to this point, and most importantly, give you all an opportunity to learn how to get more involved. You know, I wasn't here in the very early days, but Jeff and Artic were, and I think it's maybe useful, Jeff, if you could share a little bit about the early days, how we got to this place, how we've been thinking about decentralization. Could you maybe share?
Sure, thanks, Paul. So, Chung, Alexander, myself, we actually met each other in one of the first NFT communities that gathered around a game called CryptoKitties. And from the start, it was clear that NFTs changed the way that a community thought about the product that they were using. You felt like this was your project, that it was almost your duty to help contribute and push the project forward. But with CryptoKitties, it felt like that feeling wasn't reciprocated or understood by the team that was driving the project forward. We wanted to do more. We wanted to help, but we felt like we weren't being considered partners and stakeholders within the project. So that was the early context. And just like many of you, I started out as an Axie community member, first and foremost. And when I joined the project, it had a feeling that the community was being actively engaged, right? Even before I was a part of the project, where Trung, Masamune, Bean, Artic, they were in the Discord, engaging, talking about the future, figuring out ways to really build together in the early days before there was even in a game, before you could even see your Axies. So I think that was part of the DNA from the early days. And yeah, I think that's always been a part of the lifeblood of the project from the first day that I discovered it.
And you guys kind of embedded that into the foundation of what Sky Mavis is all about.
Definitely. So we see Web3's fundamental innovation as a evolution in ownership. We see our mission as building and creating property rights for all users of the internet, starting with gamers first.
And so we are here for Axie Infinity, and Axie Infinity is the first of these nations. It's a big ambition, multi-gaming ecosystem with lots of different experiences and ways for people to get engaged and have fun. And Sky Mavis as an organization has obviously evolved a lot from its first four founders. It's becoming a rapidly growing organization. We've been anticipating that building a world requires a lot of engagement from various different talent sets. But then the community's also been growing and growing. You all are here. You've come from all around the world to be at this event. It's amazing to see you all, be able to spend time with you. And I think what we all believe is that this ecosystem, the scale and size of which we've been talking about, it can't be built by a single organization. There's only so much that you can scale one single organization. And really, nation building is something that we all have to be collectively involved in. And what we've seen throughout these past few years is that there is a really strong mission alignment between the founders, the builders, the players, we all believe in the same thing. We see this opportunity. There's a lot of ground that needs to be covered, but we all have this aspiration, this vision. And we also believe that when you build collaboratively, you should be able to share in the collaborative value that comes from that effort. And so we really believe in this idea of a new social contract where we build and share in the results of this ecosystem together. And that's really the foundation of all of this work that we're doing around governance. And so you've been hearing this concept of progressive decentralization over the past 4 or 5 months. And that started in late March with a blog post that hopefully you all saw. If you didn't, I would encourage you to take a look at it, hold us accountable to some of the things that we wrote back then. But we didn't just stop at a blog post. We actually have been busy at work. You might or might not be aware of some of the many things that have happened. We'd like to walk you through some of those things. So the first phase was establishing what we think of as our quote-unquote urban planning team. These are what we refer to as our town builders. It's a subsegment of the community that has expressed a real interest in town building. They've either through blog posts or through what they've shared through the community, they've tried to help us think through how to structure governance. And some of those people are either on the stage or in the audience. These are our first 5 town builders. So we have Artic. I don't know if any of the other town builders are in the audience. If you could just stand up. Yeah, there's Freak. Hey, how are you? And so we've had a few of these members of our community take a real active interest in the urban planning process. And from that early day, we've said, you all are now the town builders, and Sky Mavis will help to facilitate this community dialogue around how to structure our governance. And some of the early conversations in that first month or so really focused around, like, what do we believe are some of the core principles in governance? And I thought they were really good conversations. And some of the observations that we had, and you'll see why these are important later, is that an ecosystem grows as people work together and create value. So when you come, you participate, and as you participate and do things, that creates value, and that's what allows the ecosystem to grow. What we also recognized is that you don't really understand what's needed in the ecosystem unless you participate and you learn and you're an active participant in the day-to-day activities of the community. But most importantly, to maybe summarize these things, and Artic, I'd love for you to share some thoughts around this, but we ultimately believe that those who best understand what the community needs and ones that have actively, objectively created value, they deserve influence over the future of the ecosystem. So I don't know, Artic, if you want to share some of what those conversations were like back in those early months or early weeks.
So ever since the early days of Axie Infinity, and when I joined, when people would join, they would first get to know the community and see somewhere where there was a gap that they could contribute their skills. So for instance, Freak and his tools, or Baron R with Axie Chat. Myself in the early days, I just helped out in the Discord a lot, answering questions. And as the ecosystem grew, I think all of us have our own unique skills, and instead of being told where to apply our skills, we were allowed to just more independently decide where we want to contribute. And I think that level of autonomy that Axie Infinity provides for contribution is one of the most special things of our entire community.
So what we would like to share with you all are just some early ponderings of the town builders around what some of those phases of decentralization are. So this phase 0, this establishing the urban planning team, is just as you heard it described. But then the next step is to, if we believe that contribution is the foundation of governance, we want to be able to identify who is contributing? And how do we distinguish them? How do we find a way to provide them an opportunity to be identified and give them voice? So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and hopefully you've seen some work that we've been doing around identifying contribution. Then we think that once we start identifying those contributors, we want to establish some councils, which are made up of those contributors. We want to then, once those councils are identified, we figure out where the logical groupings are. We then want to empower them. We want to start giving them some authority over some baseline decisions. And then ultimately, you're going to get down to resources. And we've been talking a lot about the community treasury and what it's going to be used for. And we believe that ultimately, a core part of governance is deciding how resources are to be allocated. And so our hope and intention is that as these councils become more and more mature, they'll start having some ability to influence resources. And then finally, last but not least, we see that final stage is the full treasury being governed by a number of these councils and individuals who are contributing. Anything that you two want to add there?
Yeah, I think we're really trying to take an organic approach in how this community forms. We don't want to dictate how people can contribute. We want to see, well, and in step one, we want to just see what does our community look like? What kind of skills do we have? And then from there, we want to allow the community to form these councils in a more organic way.
I think we're really taking a first principles approach where we are acting like we don't know anything about governance from the beginning. We kind of understand the general North Star, which is a more empowered community, a more incentive-aligned community. But we feel like there are very few successful examples of governance that have ever been seen in Web3 and even in the real world. Mm-hmm. And so we are carefully laying out the goals, the principles, and trying to create something new, trying to create, just like Axie is a game that's never been seen before. We're also looking to create a system of governance that hasn't really ever had a parallel or a similar counterpart in the real world.
So this is why we need you all to be engaged. This is serious stuff. This is the future of Axie Infinity. And so we've moved into phase one, which is about identifying contributors. And in early July, we established a small team that we're calling the contributor electors. So the town builders went through and created some criteria. You see them listed here. And based upon people that we thought were outstanding representatives of contributors, both geographically and the nature of contributions, the town builders selected these 7 community members. Hopefully some of them are familiar faces to you all. Are there any contributor electors in the audience? If so, can you stand up, stand up real quick? Oh, there's Ouchie. Hey, Ouchie, how are you? There's Bernard in the back there. And so these contributor electors have now started the process of identifying other contributors from the community. And so their early priorities have been really simple stuff, like what does it mean to contribute? What is a contribution? What isn't a contribution? What is the application process? What's a fair process to formally identify contributors? Who, what, and when? You might be wondering lots of different questions, like, is a Sky Mavis team member a contributor? Well, one of the questions that they answered was that they want to invite Sky Mavis members to apply to be contributors in the same way that any community member is. So there's lots of debate that we've been having over the last few weeks around this process of who, what, and when. But then there's a lot of applications that come in, and we believe that those need to be reviewed by other members of the community. So we've been building a review process. And they've been building to awareness around the importance of credentialing and what it means to be a part of this ground stage of piloting the governance. And so we kicked off, hopefully you all have seen, in the middle of August the Season 0 election process. And we really are trying to do this first phase as a pilot. There's a lot of lessons that we need to learn in this early stage. And so we're trying to make the barrier to entry of contribution fairly low to start. The good news is, even with what we think is some very early PR, we've had over 800 applications thus far, which is exciting. We hope to get more. Our goal is to have at least 1,000 contributors. Our intention is to build enough of a cohort to really test out scalable processes. And so the application deadline for this season is on September 23rd. There's a rolling review process that's already happening. We're really excited to announce that in October, we intend to give a Ronin-based NFT credential to all contributors. This is the premiere that's the graphic art of the NFT that you see in front of you, thanks to the art team at Sky Mavis. And we hope to actually do some really interesting experiments with this. And so the contributor electors, once that contributor cohort is identified, there are then two concurrent activities that they want to start exploring. And one is, what are the Season 0 contributors like? What do they prioritize influencing? How are they different than a non-contributor? What do they believe about the AXS token? How have they historically held the AXS token? What incentives would they like to see in order to be a greater holder of the AXS token? There's a lot of things that we can't make assumptions about. And then I think there's a second thread around making this election process something that is sustainable in perpetuity. And so our goal is every 6 months there'll be another election process. So people that maybe historically were contributors in the past might not be contributors in the future. New contributors come and go over time. And so we want to have a way of being able to identify contribution over time. Anything you guys want to add?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that this Season 0 contribution process won't be perfect, but as we bring contributors and credential contributors, we want to talk with you as well about how can we improve this process and get a larger picture of who is a contributor. So while it won't be perfect, I think we want to really learn from this process, from the contributors who are selected, and grow that process.
Anything you want to add, Jeff?
Yeah, I've been really excited by the response to the initial Season 0 applications. I think we've seen over 800 so far. We just saw a spike in applications with the localization in Spanish and Japanese, I believe.
Yep.
So yeah, I invite you all to apply. If you're at AxieCon, it's a good chance that, yeah, you're doing great things for the Axie Nation, and would love for you to be part of the program.
So we've got this process of identifying contributors, so we wanted to give them maybe a little bit of a sneak preview in what's next. And one of the probably the most common questions I get asked when we talk about credentialing is, well, is it just a nice thing to have, or will it have significance and meaning? And I think, as we've alluded to, this is an ongoing experiment. And one of the things that we really want to experiment with is granting privileges with this credential. Because it's on-chain, it provides a foundation on which we can start doing things. So for example, and these are all draft ideas that we're going to experiment with. So we've created some online forums. We've thought about maybe making some forums world readable, but maybe those who have the credential get a disproportionate ability to communicate or to speak or to give voice, especially around conversations that might have influence on decision making. And so maybe this credential might allow people to talk on certain forums. It might be a prerequisite to granting programs. So one way to distribute resources is by allowing for people to apply for grants. And we might say that this particular type of grant opportunity is open to contributors versus non-contributors. We've talked about early access to products, maybe early access to alphas or games or who knows. There's all kinds of things that we could potentially unlock with this credential. And we've also talked about a world in where passive staking starts leaving in favor of active staking. And so what role does this credential have as maybe a prerequisite towards active staking? We also talked about, the subsequent stages of governance. We talked about establishing councils. We think as that cohort comes together, they'll start to self-organize into various groups, and we want to facilitate that. We have some ideas of what those groupings might be. You might have seen some of them. Like, for example, we've talked about gameplay balancing be a council. Governance, obviously, is a council. There might be some others that are on your mind. We want to let that happen organically. We want those to self-form. And then, obviously, delegating responsibilities to those councils is the following step after that. And we see that happening in early 2023 and throughout 2023. Anything you guys want to add?
Yeah, so on the early access to products front, I think that doesn't need to be just Sky Mavis products. If a community product chooses to do so, they could interact with the contributor NFT without permission from anybody. They could integrate that into their project as well. So I think that idea goes beyond just core Axie Infinity products. That could be, the Axie Infinity community as a whole, if you so choose, as a builder.
From the launch of the white paper, right, we had this concept called the Axie score laid out. And really what I see this as is us being able to build towards something like an Axie score, right? Because if you're going to have an Axie score and you're going to be giving individuals a number that affects their staking rewards, then there has to be a process. There has to be a way for that number to be derived in a way that is just and makes sense and is accepted by the community.
So, hopefully your appetite is whetted if it wasn't already. And I want to appeal to different types of interest. So if you think to yourself, well, man, I want to be a town builder. Can I become a town builder? The answer is yes, potentially. We identified the 5 town builders that have already been identified. They now have the responsibility of minting other town builders. So if you're interested, find one of the town builders, show them that you're interested, and you can get involved. If you're a contributor to Axie, you plan to contribute, well, you have the Season 0 election process. It's underway. We have application window open throughout this next few weeks. Please apply. If not, and you just want to ask some questions around the process, the contributor electors, I pointed them out. You'll see them here at AxieCon. Please approach them, approach any of us. We'd be happy to answer questions. And I want to put a small plug in for the afternoon session. There's another room in the back where we're going to have an unconference session around governance. So bring your questions, bring your observations, bring your criticisms. What did we miss? You're welcome to come and join, and based upon who participates, we'll tailor the conversation to who's there. If you are an introverted person and you just want to spend more time thinking and learning about governance, a question that I often get asked is, where could I go read more about governance? Here are some of the books that have inspired us: The Wisdom of Crowds, The Art of Community, The Social Singularity. Come and find me. I can share some others with you all. A lot of input, a lot of previous art went into some of the things that you heard today, not to mention all of the many, many contributions and feedback that you all have given us over the past months. I'd maybe like to close and give both Artic and Jiho an opportunity to share some reflections based upon where we're headed with governance. Artic, did you want to start?
Sure. So While the path forward is uncharted, I think our ultimate goal is getting governance of Axie Infinity into the hands of the community, into the hands of the people who actually use Axie Infinity and know this community, not outsiders who just buy up a bunch of tokens and push their own proposals through. So yeah, while this process, it's not going to be exactly defined, I think we're going to be defining this process together, and I'm really looking forward to it personally. And I'd also like to thank Paul and Jiho and Sky Mavis for recognizing me and enabling me to be a beginning part of this process. And I'm really looking forward to getting more and more people involved in a measured but fairly quick way.
I think the amazing thing about Axie is that it's opt-in, right? We all choose to be here. We come from all walks of life. We're from all over the world. And recently, right, it feels like society is losing trust in the systems and the structures that have gotten us to this point, right? It seems like the governments of the world, the legacy nations, don't really know what they're doing. And we're starting to see these online grassroots movements and communities gain more and more relevance over our daily lives, right? Axie is just maybe one example. But I strongly believe that the future of decision-making, the future of how we move ourselves as societies, I think that it will be determined by these grassroots online communities. And we have a chance as the Axie Nation to really set the standard. If we don't figure this stuff out, it might be possible that no one else will. So that's the opportunity before us, and I'm really excited to push forward with each and every one of you.
I just maybe want to close by saying that we are all collectively Axie Infinity. We're extremely excited that you all are here at AxieCon. It means a lot to us that you were willing to travel the world to be here, and it's another reaffirmation that you all care deeply about this thing that we're all building together. We hope that what you see in this presentation is a way in which you can get more agency and start to influence the process more and more. But we welcome your continued input, your feedback, even your criticisms. We really want to encourage an open, frank dialogue around how we can empower everyone. So we look forward to talking with you more about this in the days to come. And thank you very much for the opportunity to give you guys an overview. Thanks a lot.